I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to sit in a dimly lit diner at 3 p.m., nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. But here I was, staring out the rain-speckled window, wondering how my life could unravel so completely in just one day. My name is Daniel Harper, and for 25 years, I poured my heart into Carter & Company, a company I loved like it was my own family. Well, almost. Charles Carter, the founder, wasn't just my boss. He was my mentor, my confidant, maybe even the father figure I never really had. Together, we built something special, a manufacturing business rooted in tradition, trust, and hard work. And then, like a storm cloud rolling in without warning, everything changed when she came back. Sophia Carter walked into our lives like she owned the place, which technically, I suppose, she did, fresh off her private jet from Zurich, where she'd earned some fancy MBA no one asked for. She strutted into the office wearing designer heels and an attitude sharp enough to cut glass. At 30 years old, Sophia had always been difficult. Growing up as Charles's only child, she got whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it. But this time felt different. This wasn't the same spoiled teenager who used to demand extra vacation days for her interns. No, this Sophia carried herself with a new kind of arrogance, like she cracked some secret code about running a business while sipping espresso in Europe. The first meeting we had together was tense, to say the least. She sat at the head of the table, Charles's seat, and started tearing apart every decision we'd made over the past decade. "We're behind," she said, flipping through spreadsheets like they were gospel. "If we don't modernize, we'll be obsolete." I tried to explain that innovation takes time, especially in an industry as traditional as ours, but she dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "Daniel," she said, leaning forward with a smirk, "you've been here forever. Maybe it's time you let someone else take the wheel." It didn't take long for things to escalate. Sophia began micromanaging every department, pushing employees to adopt her vision without considering the consequences. Morale plummeted faster than profits ever could. Then came the quarterly review, a disaster waiting to happen. I stood there in front of the boardroom, presenting our latest numbers, when Sophia interrupted me mid-sentence. "These figures are unacceptable," she snapped, slamming her palms on the table. "How can we compete if we keep wasting resources on outdated processes?" "Outdated," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Those outdated processes have kept us profitable for decades." She shot me a look that could freeze fire. "Profitable isn't good enough anymore. We need growth, Daniel. Innovation, not whatever it is you're doing." That stung, but what came next hit harder. "You're fired," she said flatly, folding her arms across her chest. The room fell silent. Even Charles looked stunned. "I'm sorry," I managed, though my throat felt dry. "You heard me." Effective immediately. "Pack your things and leave." And just like that, 25 years of loyalty meant nothing. Walking out of that building was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every step felt heavier than the last, like gravity itself was mocking me. People avoided eye contact as I passed their desks, muttering quick condolences under their breath. They were scared. Scared of Sophia. Scared of losing their jobs if they sided with me. I couldn't blame them. When I got home, I sat in my recliner and stared at the walls, which suddenly seemed too small, too empty. All those late nights, all those sacrifices. For what? For a company that didn't care? For a family that threw me away like yesterday's newspaper? It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. But anger wasn't the worst part. It was a shame. How do you face your wife after getting fired at 50? How do you explain to your kids that their dad isn't invincible? Word spread quickly about what happened. Or rather, Sophia's version of events. According to her, I was holding the company back, clinging to the past instead of embracing change. Clients started calling, asking questions. Suppliers grew nervous. Employees whispered among themselves, torn between loyalty to me and fear of crossing Sophia. Meanwhile, Sophia doubled down on her radical changes. She slashed budgets, outsourced entire departments, and pushed for aggressive expansion plans that made no sense. Key players began leaving the company, including Greg Morrison, our head of operations. She's going to ruin everything, Greg told me during a clandestine lunch. You should see the mess she's making. Morale is at rock bottom, and half the team doesn't trust her decisions. I nodded, feeling a mix of vindication and guilt. Vindicated because I knew Sophia was reckless. Guilty because I couldn't stop her. Then Margaret Hayes called me. Margaret was a legend around Carter and Company. Before retiring a few years ago, she'd served as CFO and had been instrumental in keeping the company afloat during tough times. If anyone knew how to navigate this chaos, it was her. "I've been hearing rumors," she said when we met at her favorite cafe downtown, "about Sophia, about what she's doing to the company. She's destroying it," I admitted, rubbing my temples, piece by piece. Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice. "There's more to it than meets the eye, Daniel. I've been digging into some financial records. You won't believe what I found." Margaret slid a folder across the table, her expression grim. "Take a look at this," she said, tapping the cover with her index finger. Inside were spreadsheets, emails, and internal memos, all damning evidence of Sophia's mismanagement. "She's been manipulating the books," Margaret explained, pointing to discrepancies in quarterly reports. "These cost-cutting measures? They're not about efficiency. They're about covering up mistakes she made early on. She overpaid consultants, botched negotiations with suppliers, and now she's trying to blame on anyone who questions her." I stared at the documents, my hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just incompetence. It was sabotage. Sophia wasn't just running the company into the ground. She was actively destroying its foundation. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "We expose her, but we need proof that will hold up under scrutiny. Something undeniable." Over the next few weeks, Margaret and I worked quietly, piecing together a case against Sophia. It wasn't easy. Every email, every document had to be authenticated. We reached out to former colleagues who still had access to sensitive information, asking them to share what they knew. Some hesitated, afraid of retaliation. Others agreed, too fed up with Sophia's leadership to care anymore. One night, while going through old files, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A series of emails between Sophia and an external auditor. In them, she discussed ways to restructure financial data to make it appear as though certain projects were failing due to poor management. The language was cryptic, but unmistakable. "This is gold," Margaret said when I showed her. "With this, we can prove she deliberately misled the board." But there was a catch. Exposing Sophia meant risking everything, not just my reputation, but Charles's legacy as well. If the truth came out, it could tarnish the Carter name forever. Was I willing to go that far? As the evidence mounted, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. Charles had always treated me like family, yet his daughter was tearing apart everything he'd built. How would he react if he found out? Would he side with her, or would he finally see the truth? One evening, I drove to Charles's house unannounced. He lived in a modest estate on the outskirts of town, surrounded by oak trees and memories. When he opened the door, his face lit up briefly before clouding with concern. "Daniel," he said, "usher me inside." "What brings you here?" We sat in his study, where photos of the company's early days lined the walls. I took a deep breath and laid out everything. Sophia's reckless decisions, the manipulated reports, the growing chaos within the company. Charles listened silently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "I've suspected something was wrong," he admitted, "but I never imagined it was as bad." "She's ruining everything, Charles," I said, my voice breaking. "Everything you worked for." He nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "I'll talk to her," he promised. "But Daniel, are you sure about all this?" His hesitation stung more than I expected. The confrontation between Charles and Sophia happened behind closed doors, but the fallout was immediate. The next day, Sophia called an emergency board meeting, her face flushed with anger. "You think you can turn my own father against me?" she spat, glaring at me from across the table. "You're nothing but a relic, Daniel." I has been clinging to the past. Her words cut deep, but I refused to back down. Your actions are jeopardizing the company. I shot back. You're not fit to lead. Oh, really? She sneered. And who's going to stop me? You. Before I could respond, she pulled out a stack of papers and slammed them onto the table. Here's something interesting I found, she said, her tone dripping with venom. Turns out our beloved Daniel isn't so innocent after all. My blood ran cold. What was she talking about? Sophia leaned back in her chair, a smug smile playing on her lips. Remember that supplier scandal 5 years ago? She asked, addressing the room. The one where payments went missing? Well, guess whose signature was on those checks? She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Yours, Daniel. The room erupted in murmurs. I felt the weight of their stares pressing down on me, accusations hanging heavy in the air. That's a lie. I protested, standing up. I didn't authorize those payments. Then explain this, Sophia said, holding up a forged document. It looked convincing, too convincing. Someone had gone to great lengths to frame me. Charles looked pale, his hands trembling as he examined the paper. Daniel, he began, his voice filled with doubt. No, I interrupted, shaking my head. You know me better than this, Charles. I would never betray you. But the damage was done. Doubt had taken root. And Sophia knew exactly how to exploit it. The meeting ended in chaos. Board members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure who to believe. Some whispered about launching an investigation. Others suggested waiting for more evidence. Sophia seized a moment, steering the conversation toward a vote of no confidence in my integrity. Charles remained silent throughout, his face pale and drawn. When the meeting adjourned, he lingered behind, staring at the forged document in his hands. Daniel, he said finally, his voice heavy with regret, I need time to process this. Time? I wanted to scream. Time wasn't something we had, not when Sophia was dismantling the company piece by piece. But arguing would only make me look guiltier. Instead, I nodded stiffly and walked out, feeling like a stranger in the very halls I'd once called home. That night, I met Margaret at her apartment. She listened intently as I recounted what had happened, her jaw tightening with each word. She's playing dirty, Margaret said, pacing the room. But she made one mistake. She underestimated us. What can we do? I asked, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She's got Charles doubting me now. Even if we expose her, will anyone listen? Margaret stopped pacing and turned to face me. We fight fire with fire, she said firmly. If she thinks she can bury you with lies, we'll dig up the truth and then some. Margaret and I spent the next few days combing through every scrap of data we could find. If Sophia thought framing me would silence us, she was dead wrong. We were determined to uncover not just her forgery, but everything else she'd been hiding. One breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Greg Morrison, the former head of operations. Over coffee, he revealed that Sophia had pressured him into approving several questionable contracts shortly before his resignation. She kept saying it was for the greater good, Greg recalled, shaking his head. But those deals were disasters waiting to happen. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. With Greg's help, we traced the contracts back to shell companies linked to Sophia's personal accounts. It was clear now. She wasn't just mismanaging funds. She was siphoning them for herself. This is enough to take her down, Margaret said, reviewing the evidence. But we need to present it carefully. One wrong move, and she'll twist it against us. To strengthen our case, we reached out to other disgruntled employees who had witnessed Sophia's misconduct firsthand. Slowly but surely, a coalition formed. Former executives, mid-level managers, even loyal factory workers, all united by a shared desire to save the company from ruin. Among them was Rachel Klein, a young analyst who had recently quit after refusing to falsify financial reports under Sophia's orders. She threatened me. Rachel confessed during a secret gathering at Margaret's house. Said I'd never work in this industry again if I didn't comply. Her courage inspired others to come forward, adding layers of credibility to our case. By the end of the week, we had amassed a dossier so damning that even Sophia's charm couldn't deflect it. But there was still the matter of Charles. Despite everything, he clung to the hope that his daughter wasn't entirely corrupt. Convincing him wouldn't be easy, but it was essential. The final showdown took place during a high-stakes shareholder meeting. Sophia had called it to announce ambitious expansion plans, confident that her fabricated narrative about my alleged corruption would sway the crowd. Instead, she was blindsided. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the podium, clutching the dossier. The room fell silent as I laid out the facts. The manipulated financials, the illicit contracts, the forged documents implicating me. One by one, witnesses corroborated my claims, their testimonies painting a picture of greed and betrayal. Sophia tried to interrupt, shouting accusations and dismissing the evidence as lies. But her voice faltered when Margaret produced a recording of her admitting to tampering with records. "You think you're untouchable?" Margaret said coldly, holding up her phone. "You're not." For the first time, Sophia looked shaken. As the truth unfolded, Charles sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and grief. He stared at his daughter, searching for any sign of denial or remorse. "Sophia," he began, his voice trembling, "is this true?" She hesitated, then attempted a feeble defense. "Dad, they're twisting things. You know I would never." "Enough," Charles interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. "I've heard enough." The room grew eerily quiet as Charles rose to his feet. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Then, with a deep sigh, he addressed the shareholders. "My daughter has betrayed not only this company, but also the trust of everyone here today," he said, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "Effective immediately, she is relieved of all duties at Carter and Company." Sophia gasped, her composure crumbling. "You can't do this," she cried. "I'm your daughter, and I am your father," Charles replied, his gaze unwavering. "Which means I must do what's right, not what's easy." Sophia's world imploded in front of everyone. As Charles's words echoed to the conference room, she slumped into her chair, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, I saw vulnerability in her, raw, unfiltered desperation. But it was too late for apologies or redemption. The shareholders erupted into murmurs, some nodding approvingly while others whispered about the scandal that would surely follow. Charles dismissed the meeting shortly after, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We'll rebuild," he said simply before leaving the room, his shoulders sagging under the weight of betrayal. As people filed out, Sophia stormed past me, her eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't over," she hissed, jabbing a finger in my direction. "You think you've won? You've destroyed our family." I didn't respond. What could I say? She had brought this on herself. Still, the look of hatred in her eyes lingered long after she disappeared. In the days that followed, Carter and Company became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the office, hungry for details about the downfall of the prodigal daughter. Employees tiptoed around each other, unsure whether to celebrate Sophia's ousting or mourn the chaos she left behind. Charles called me into his study one evening. He looked smaller somehow, as if the events of the past week had aged him decades. "Daniel," he began, his voice hoarse, "I owe you an apology. I let my loyalty to my daughter blind me to the truth." "It's not your fault," I replied softly. "She manipulated all of us." He nodded, though guilt still shadowed his expression. "Will you stay? Help me fix this mess." I hesitated. After everything that had happened, returning to Carter and Company felt like stepping back into a war zone. But deep down, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not when there was still hope for the company I'd dedicated my life to. "I'll stay," I said finally. "But we need to do things differently this time. No more secrets, no more shortcuts." Charles smiled faintly. "Agreed." With Margaret's guidance, I began restructuring the company from the ground up. We reinstated key employees who had been unfairly dismissed, renegotiated supplier contracts, and implemented transparency measures to prevent future scandals. It wasn't easy. Every decision faced scrutiny. But slowly, trust began to return. Rachel Klein rejoined the team as head of compliance, determined to ensure nothing like this could happen again. Greg Morrison came aboard as interim COO, bringing much-needed stability to operations. Even former clients who had fled during Sophia's tenure started trickling back, reassured by our renewed commitment to integrity. Still, the road ahead was fraught with challenges. The financial damage Sophia had inflicted would take years to repair. And then there was Charles. He seemed diminished, burdened by the knowledge that his own flesh and blood had nearly destroyed everything he held dear. One evening, as we reviewed quarterly projections, he turned to me with a weary smile. "You've done more for this company than I ever could, Daniel." "Thank you." His words caught me off guard. For so long, I defined myself by my loyalty to him. Now I realized something important. I wasn't just carrying his legacy, I was building my own. Just when things were starting to stabilize, another bombshell dropped. While sorting through old files, Margaret stumbled upon a document hidden deep within the archives, a letter from Charles dated 10 years earlier. It outlined his plans to sell Carter and Company to a larger conglomerate once he retired. "What does this mean?" I asked, staring at the paper in disbelief. Margaret frowned. "It means Sophia was entirely wrong about one thing. This company was never meant to last forever, at least not as a family-owned business." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. All those years of sacrifice, all the battles fought to protect Carter and Company, and it had been destined for sale anyway. But why didn't he tell us? I demanded, feeling betrayed all over again. He probably thought we'd try to stop him, Margaret reasoned. Or maybe he didn't want to admit it himself until it was absolutely necessary. I sat there in stunned silence, grappling with the implications. If Charles had always intended to sell, did that make my fight meaningless? Or was there still a way to preserve what made Carter and Company special? I confronted Charles the next day, showing him the letter. His reaction surprised me. Instead of denying it, he sighed deeply and nodded. "I should have told you sooner," he admitted. "But I was afraid of losing the only thing that gave my life purpose. So what happens now?" I asked, my voice tinged with frustration. "Do we just hand the company over to the highest bidder?" Charles shook his head. "No, that's why I'm putting the decision in your hands, Daniel. You've earned the right to choose its future." For the first time, I truly understood the magnitude of his trust. This wasn't just about saving a company. It was about shaping its destiny. After days of sleepless nights and endless deliberation, I made my choice. Sitting in Charles's study, surrounded by decades of memories etched into the walls, I laid out my plan. "We're not selling to a conglomerate," I said firmly. "Instead, we're turning Carter and Company into an employee-owned cooperative." Charles raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. "An employee-owned model? That's ambitious." "It's the only way to preserve what makes this company special," I explained. "The people, the workers, the managers, the suppliers, they're the heart of Carter and Company. If we sell to outsiders, that heart will be lost forever. But if we give ownership to those who built this place, we can ensure its survival while staying true to its roots." Margaret, who had joined us for the discussion, nodded approvingly. "It's risky, but it could work. With proper restructuring and financial backing, we might even see growth." Charles studied me for a long moment before breaking into a small smile. "You've always been a man of vision, Daniel. Do what you think is best." The transition wasn't easy. Converting Carter and Company into a cooperative required buy-in from every level of the organization, and convincing employees to invest their savings into shares wasn't a simple task. Many were hesitant, fearing another betrayal or collapse. But Rachel and Greg stepped up, organizing town halls and workshops to explain the benefits of shared ownership. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. Former skeptics became advocates, inspired by the idea of having a real stake in the company's success. One pivotal moment came during a factory floor meeting. An older worker named Joe stood up, his voice cracking with emotion. "I've been here 30 years, he said. "Carter and Company isn't just a job, it's my life. If Daniel believes in this, so do I." His words sparked a wave of support. By the end of the month, nearly 80% of eligible employees had signed on as shareholders. For the first time in years, there was hope in the air, a sense that the future wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace together. Months later, I stood on the factory floor, watching rows of machines hum with activity. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter and camaraderie. Employees moved with purpose, knowing they weren't just working for someone else. They were building something for themselves. Charles walked beside me, leaning heavily on his cane. His health had declined further, but his eyes sparkled with pride. "I never thought I'd see this day," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "A new beginning, born from ashes." "It's your legacy, Charles," I replied, "and theirs." He shook his head gently. "No, Daniel, it's yours now. You saved this company, not because you had to, but because you believed in it. That's what makes you extraordinary." As he turned to leave, I called after him, "What will you do now?" He paused, smiling faintly. "Rest, and maybe write a few letters to Sophia, to myself, to whoever cares to listen. We all make mistakes, Daniel. What matters is how we rise above them." Later that evening, as I locked up the office, I found a letter waiting on my desk. It was from Charles, written in his shaky handwriting. "To Daniel, the son I never had but always admired. Thank you for teaching me that loyalty isn't blind. It's earned. Take care of our family." Tears blurred my vision as I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the city skyline. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Loyalty wasn't about clinging to the past. It was about creating a worth fighting for. And in that moment, I knew Carter and Company would endure, not as a monument to one man's ambition, but as a testament to the power of unity, resilience, and trust.